Anthony, I appreciate you being back with us. What do you think is the average age a founder who builds a massively successful startup these days?
You'd kind of be you'd be enticed to think it's pretty young. So I guess average startup founder, I'd say somewhere around young 20s.
Yeah, yeah, that's what everyone thinks. The data shows that the average age, if you double that, is actually about 45, which
Oh,
is
well.
ridiculous, right? And it gets weirder, right? Like, so today, everything you think you know about startups, and again, more facts like this, we're going to be challenging and just showing you guys the true nature of like how crazy this game is as a whole. So, Anthony, you ready to get into it here over the next 20,
Yeah.
30 minutes?
Yeah, as always, let's talk about something cool.
Segment one, I want to talk about this like young genius style myth, right? You see this image online, it's pushed repetitively, right? Of the Lamborghini, it used to be the model, it used to be e-commerce. I remember way back in the day, everyone was buying drop shipping stuff and starting their own drop shipping business, right? You could do it from your laptop. Now it's courses and learning how a pro who's pretending most likely to be a pro is doing something. But now it's just AI and the AI race, which obviously we're a big. I want to go back for a second before we kind of discuss like to that stat I just gave you, right? The average age of founders of the fastest growing startups in the US is 45. A 50-year-old is roughly twice as likely to hit a runaway success on a company as a 30-year-old. Twice as likely, right? Just from those 20 extra years. What do you think? What do you feel when you hear a stat like that compared to what you see online?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I have this perception that 50 is kind of like you're old at that point, and it's to me that seems like it's too late, right? I guess that's kind of the prevailing thought process in the industry as a whole. I guess I should say the social media industry. Really, it makes me feel like reality is being skewed, and I kind of wonder like to what end, like why is that the case? And what I mean by that is like why would the perception by most young people, myself included, as you could tell by my response earlier, be that it's everybody that's young that's starting a business or being successful. What do the content creators pushing that have to gain from that? I don't quite understand.
Yeah. Well, I think honestly, the content creators that are pushing it, I think they know the stats are that skewed, but they're trying to create their own income, most likely by exploiting others in the fact that everyone wants to be successful too, right? And when you actually look at the data, right, and that comes from Kellogg research, three times more likely than a 20 to 30-year-old to succeed in a startup. I would argue that if I'm 50, I would look back at the 22-year-old and say, the things that made you not succeed weren't necessarily the business. It was your ability to take on life. A 50-year-old probably has kids too, so they're used to dealing with responsibilities. They're used to planning a budget better. They've had to survive that long, so they know how to take a punch a little bit better than a 20 to 30-year-old whose ego is on the line. Really, this is their first time stepping out. A 50-year-old probably was also the 20 to 30-year-old that tried to succeed. So if you think about it, really, that can be the same person. Like a 50-year-old could be a 20 to 30-year-old who just failed that many times until they succeeded. So it's also just luck in the actual business. And a big way to make sure that you at least by minimum age 50 make it is to keep going that whole time. I think that's probably where I'd have to guess it comes from. Serial founders who previously succeeded had a 30 success rate, which is pretty good for a startup, right? Like in this economy. Founders who previously failed still beat first timers 20% versus 18. So the stat here says that failing once is worth more than never having tried. The only variable you can control is when you start. The earlier, just like investing, you start is what guarantees more success.
I guess that makes sense, right? That's just the case with anything. The longer you are persistent or consistent doing something, one, it gives you more experience. So that's probably also what you were saying, that what plays into a 50-year-old being more successful as a first time entrepreneur than a 30-year-old is, well, I mean, they've had your 10 years worth of life experience as an adult, let alone if you've been trying at the entrepreneur thing that whole time, then it's double experience, as an adult, but then also as someone who's been trying to build a business. If you want to be good at anything, it's a 10,000 hour rule, right? So they've had more opportunities to hit that 10,000 hour mark, multiple times probably.
So, okay, riddle me this. Like, then if failure improves your odds of succeeding, just like, you do MMA, right? Or jujitsu specifically. Like, does that mean in business, right? The smartest thing a 25-year-old could do is to start something they almost expect to fail for the reps specifically.
With the mindset specifically, I think that maybe you shouldn't expect yourself to fail, because I think that could be a hindrance at some point.
Yeah.
It,
You
it
gotta
could possibly,
manifest it too, so.
yeah, it could possibly, mean that you care less or that you're less interested in trying to really, persevere through challenges if you expect it to not go well anyways. You're like, well, I don't expect much anyway. So, but I think as opposed to expecting to fail, you should probably just be okay with the chance or the probability that you will fail, but don't let that hinder your ability to pursue the task at hand anyways.
Yeah, I love comparing it to the gym because they're both something that you have to put reps into, and you're gonna only succeed after you fail a ton. There's a lot of ways to kind of shortcut this, right? You don't have to get beat down until you succeed. There's ways to complement it, just like the gym too, right? Like if you had a workout buddy, right, or a training partner, that's probably one of the best ways to lift yourself up faster. If you have a spotter, right, at the gym, you're gonna do better. And I think this kind of brings us into segment two, right? Like why it's important to have somebody on your team to help. And here's the thing, right? The data contradicts itself in a little way. Startup Genome, which is a source we looked at, says that startups with two co founders instead of just one raise 30% more money than just solo individuals. So, other research says co founded startups are 3 times more likely to succeed. So, which is it, right? So, co founders help you raise, right? But co founders don't necessarily help you survive in the game. Those are two very different games. So, like raising money versus actually running a business is a topic I think people should be aware of too. It's important for people to raise money in a company or why they should try to seek external investment at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you just think about like the resources aside from time that it takes to, have your business actually take off or become a success or see any real revenue, it's probably, there's a few methods, right? You can bootstrap, which is what most entrepreneurs, especially in the days where we have AI as a free, useful tool. That's what most entrepreneurs go for. And that essentially just means that you're paying out of your own pocket for everything to be funded for marketing, for development, for distribution, for, whatever it is that you got to do, cost of goods sold. But it's the reason most people end up trying to raise money, especially if you scale to a point where it's going to start costing you more than like what you're pulling in per month to just to keep the startup running, keep the lights on per se. That's when you'd have to kind of go out and seek external investment into the company. And so the exchange there is that somebody gets a percentage of, the company. It's so ownership, right? So let's say, and you'd negotiate these terms, but just for simplicity's sake, somebody offers you the $40,000 you need to finish XYZ product or project rather that's going to get you, off the runway and flying a little bit in your startup. And then in exchange, they want 10% of your company.
Yeah.
So profits 10% of what you rake in for the next indefinite until you essentially fulfill your exit strategy goes to that person. But they gave you what you needed to start up right now.
Yeah, and part of it too is valuation. You actually, if you raise $400,000 for 20% of your company, right? You can do the math. That means you're an $8 million company. So if you're a $2 million company, right, you can actually tell how your company is growing if you're not publicly traded, which many of us will be as we do startups. You can tell kind of what it's worth, and therefore outside investors can look at that and actually be willing to buy your company because they have a solid understanding that somebody else is kind of like getting a home appraised, has valued it at a certain point. Solo founders are 2.6 times more likely to still have a running business than teams of 3 plus after, a year, right? And 41% less likely to fail than two-person teams. But then I also said that co-founded startups are 3 times more likely to succeed. Co-founders help you get the money, but they don't necessarily help you survive unless the chemistry is there. Otherwise, it's easier, especially in the AI age, to have one person make all the decisions, maybe with AI. But doing the actual work, you need a team. So that's kind of the difference I want to point out there. So, Anthony, you and I work together. Where do you think is the line between being helpful and then having too many cooks in the kitchen?
Yeah, I think it might be important to consider like potential dynamics here. So the statistics we just read or that Caleb just read off would paint the picture that the more people involved in decision making, the less likely the company is to withstand the trials that come from decision making down the line. Whereas you're more likely to succeed in the beginning the more people you have, even if that doesn't equate to, long-standing, incoming revenue. So what that means in terms of the dynamic for the team is that multiple minds put together as you're starting something, that creativity of being able to bounce something off of each other's head and to kind of see multiple perspectives as you make the initial decision making seems to be what is the most helpful to success in the immediate term. But then it sounds like as you keep going down the line, when it becomes more complex to run the business, to manage the money, somebody has to be designated for every different branch of what's going on for marketing, for you need a
Yes.
COO, CFO, stuff like that. Then it seems like it kind of becomes the dynamic then comes from it being a strength that you have this many heads in decision making to a weakness almost. So I think that to answer your question, where that balance lies is there might not be a definitive answer for every team. I would say it's probably more important or most important as you're going through your progression to just be able to identify the strengths and weaknesses of each individual on your team and be able to kind of forecast and say, is this person's strengths or weaknesses going to outweigh the cost of what it's going to potentially take a toll on a business in the future as we decision make together? Does it make sense to work with this person long term, and kind of just take that into account maybe before you begin to be too heavily invested with that person?
Team conflict is 23% of startups' failures. So it's the top four killer, really, ahead of getting crushed by competition or something like that. So
Caleb is a very creative, smart, driven, kind of take charge sort of personality, whereas I'm more of a task oriented, grounded kind of personality in the business, I guess. And so we complement each other in our pros and our cons, right? And so that makes things easier for us to be able to have both perspectives when we need a creative aspect and to solve problems. And then also when we need someone to keep us grounded on the tasks at hand instead of chasing another shiny object. I think the line just falls where it makes the most sense for the tasks that you guys have at hand. If it becomes too much work for like the current number of people on your team to get everything done in a day, and you're just kind of becoming stagnant, then I think it makes sense to have more people. But I think that the fewer people you can handle while still accomplishing the tasks at hand is probably better just based off the statistics.
yeah. If you're going to start up a company with somebody, especially somebody like you meet in college on a class project, right? And you don't know them as a person, do me a favor and like take them maybe golfing or take them to like an escape room or just have them take like a Myers-Briggs test, right? Figure out how they react to problems under pressure and whether or not they're more of the problem solver of the group or they're more of like the communicator, orchestrator, or maybe they're more of like the, easygoing person, break tension or whatever it's going to be. You have to know who you're putting in charge of what position because you need like power players on your team as you're going to scale up. Being able to cross off objectives makes you like really great to take on day-to-day operation stuff like, hey, we need to go look at this grant. And those are good things for like somebody with your personality type, your work style and things like that to accomplish. They say on average, right? 14% more money is raised by people that have technical experience. So like whoever you think is going to be out in the field actually pitching to like face to face with investors should probably be your most technical person, even if they're a little more awkward or anything like that. Somebody has to have that responsibility and they need to have that personality to communicate. So like who goes where and what stuff people handle matters a lot. And especially if you're building software or anything with AI can do a lot of the coding, but it does matter who is talking to that AI, especially these days, because what problems you hit or miss is going to make or break the company at the end of the day. And for that reason, you should have multiple people with anything that comes to AI because there's a lot of mistakes that you can trust too easily. The whole point of business is to make money. And the stat here is only 16%, less than 1 in 5 founders blamed the money as being the factor they couldn't succeed, which is crazy, right? The
It's
number
crazy.
one killer is 56% people thought was building something that nobody wanted. They thought that was, the biggest killer there. And 75% of venture-backed startups never return investors cash. So they're focused on the wrong problems. I think they're focused on like product market placement versus at the end of the day, making the business model work. And even if you find the perfect fit, if you're paying $5 to get a $2 a month profit customer, then you're losing money on paper. And that's never a business you should have been in to begin with. How do you tell, whether there's no market for something versus like we gave up too early? Is there like a real signal to tell whether or not there's genuinely no demand or if you're maybe just working on the wrong thing?
I don't know. I'm sure there's more nuance to it, but I would say it's probably a delineation between like what have you actually tried to accomplish as compared to the results of what you have accomplished so far. And so what I mean by that is if you have this product and you've seemingly put everything you can into distributing it to people, into getting collaborations so people can see what it is you've done, into the actual development of the product itself, into marketing, into all the legalities of setting up the business, and it comes to a point where it feels like no matter what you do, even after you've taken multiple sessions, maybe consulting with somebody, maybe even asking AI continuously what more you could do. And then you've done enough analysis to kind of determine that either the market is too saturated for what it is you're trying to offer at this point in time, or that it's really just not something people are interested in. Then I think maybe you could start to think about that. There's really a market for everything. I would just say you'd have to be pretty sure that you've done all you possibly could and be very sure in your analysis of that decision in order to make the decision to, to pivot or to try something else. But if you're on the other side of that, where it's like you're kind of only putting minimal amounts of time into it, and then you kind of just figure maybe you have the problem that most people do, which is you are chasing one thing after another and you're never really finishing the first thing or the second thing or the third thing, then I think maybe that would be a time when that would be too soon to quit. But I'm sure there's more nuance to it. I want to hear your perspective as well.
I think I'll challenge what you said. I think almost you can sell just about anything. Colonel Sanders didn't even start making money with KFC and get his first franchise deal until he was like, I think it was 65-ish. So he was basically at the end of his life, like when he finally made KFC. He did it for like 40 something years and never gave up. Sometimes it just takes that long, but usually most of us aren't playing the time game. Like we're not real estate investors when we're trying to make our first business. We're trying to get some money in our pocket before we do any of that crazy long-term passive stuff. And so whatever active business model you're deploying, it has to cash flow relatively soon, especially because you got to market it, you got to have operations. If you're using AI, you got to pay for that, right? So I would look at it for, are you actually focused on distribution? We talked about that last episode. Go watch it. Like, are you doing things that actively get your company FaceTime with real people that care about it and have money to buy it? Most of the time, you guys are looking in the wrong spot. Like we have Nova, which is a AI planner tool that's on the App Store right now. You guys can go check it out. But if we tried to target that to, let's say, college students, a lot of them don't have money and a lot of them can just use like Google Planner or Google Calendar or their Notes app or something like that. If we're targeting startup teams or small enterprises, right, that have some money to deploy in an operating account, the $15 if you want the full experience is not a bad ask. So it does matter where you look. And I think that's probably the best signal to look for. And you do need to give that time to you. You're not going to get a million users in 5 months, right? You got to give it a couple years. You got to be consistent and you still got to in some way play that time game. But all we're doing is just compressing it from waiting 20 years. And so, I think we've all built something that nobody wanted. Maybe it wasn't a business, right? But maybe it was a post on social media, right? Like maybe it was like a class project that the teacher didn't necessarily want to hang up on the wall for you or anything like that. And you kind of can get the idea that something's going not in the right direction. And most of us kind of have a gut instinct. But I would always say to give things their proper amount of time. And whenever you think you haven't given it long enough, force yourself to be patient. Because I think most people's attention spans are kind of, I don't know, I guess I'd say cooked nowadays. I'd say you and I kind of obsess over this focus of understanding and placing ourselves properly, like at ALTURA, right? We kind of rather talk to users or try to like fix what's wrong rather than go fundraise. So I don't know, it
Yeah.
seems important to us.
I mean, that's why we're doing these podcasts, for example.
Yeah.
It's really just like the lessons that we're actively learning that we talk about in the podcast, but it's a huge what the best way to get it in front of somebody's that's actually interested in its face and try it. So yeah, one of these podcasts really is to, have discussions with people and figure out what people are doing too in the space.
Where can you find these discussions? Where can you get feedback from people? How?
Well, one example in particular that comes to mind would be alturasociety.com, in which we have a growing network of people that are in the same boat largely. I mean, for sure as us, but largely in the audience of these podcasts that are kind of asking themselves these similar questions, right? Like, how do you tell when there's no market? Am I about to give up too early? Why isn't this thing I built, even though I know the value of it, getting the attention it deserves? And then subsequently, the money that I think I am working hard to earn. Those questions are asked by the people in our community all the time. And it's what we developed is a simple solution where in a world where it's become essentially free and extremely easy to develop something, frankly, whether it be an AI tool or a website. Since that's free, the new thing becomes not necessarily spending a bunch of money and time in developing the tool, but now it's like everyone's developing tools. That's what vibe coding is. When we try to put an app out in the app store, it takes them months to review it because everybody's kind of, sloppy work as done with AI is get pending review through Apple to have an app.
Yeah.
Anybody can do it, right? And so that's not the problem anymore. The problem is how do I get people to see it? And that's why we do these podcasts is because we are offering a solution, which is go to alturasociety.com and take what it is you built, input your links, input everything you use to work, Google Calendar, things like that, and have our AI, instead of just selling you an AI tool, put together exactly what it is that you do and compact it in a box in the form of a marketplace listing. um, it's as simple as posting your marketplace listing and say, this is what I developed. This is who it's useful for. This is how I think I can help your business in particular do this task. It's not necessarily just going and listing, I do freelance work. It's, hey, I built something for this particular reason. And I think it's very helpful because I've seen people struggle with this. And the difference between the other apps and ours is that you're already in a community of people that's probably suffering from the same things that your tool aims to solve. It's a group of people that are doing the same thing, and we all need each other's help and support. And
Yeah,
so,
and people aren't gonna steal your idea. Nobody's ever gonna copy it the exact same way you can do it, and they're not gonna copy your audience, they're not gonna copy your market positioning. At a certain point, they can't copy your LLC. Like they can't take everything. So you're actually better off, the numbers say, like in just long term history, just working with people because I'd rather have that feedback and know who could actually benefit me or what somebody's doing that's better. And if somebody is doing something that's better, I'd want to know that too. So I don't keep wasting my time and money on something like again we were trying to build Nova into the next Claude, and then I just simply used Claude, and I'm like, it's going to be a while before we have the money or resources to compete directly against a company this size. We're better off pivoting to something we're more attuned to and complementing these other players. And you can make relationships, co-founders, you can merge companies, you can do whatever you want in this startup incubator with free traction if you're trying to get off the ground. And there's no ask or fee to be in here. Facebook Marketplace will show your listing. I'm selling a laptop to somebody right now. They put it out in front of people. I don't even have to pay for anything. That's the same thing you're getting here. So why wouldn't you use it if you're trying to sell your business instead of a laptop? And I will say that on that idea of being first, right? If you have a good idea, you have to gatekeep it. I think that's something a lot of us take personally. Like we feel like we have to protect our idea because, we have to come out big and like shock the world or whatever it is. But I think that it's actually not beneficial, even though you think being first, being the first mover is always the big thing. I would challenge that. My research in a study of 500 brands, that I've cited off 50 product categories, the first movers had a lower long-term market share than the fast followers who came after. And these followers entered the market an average of 13 years afterwards. So you're not gaining a significant advantage by gatekeeping your idea, hiding it from everyone, and then trying to build it on your own versus just using leverage. And nearly half of those market pioneers will fail a company. Google wasn't the first search engine. Facebook wasn't the first social networks. I don't know why we keep believing being first like really matters at the end of the day.
yeah, I think people have this preconceived notion that you're too late if you're entering something after it's already been developed, right? But people fail to consider that it's like you're not going for the entire market as a whole. If this is like the whole market of people on Earth that could potentially buy your product, it's definitely broken down into like subsects to get like the people that are tailored to this product in particular. And then even that you could zoom in and, it's not like every single one of those people is going to go for the first company to ever do it. Like you said, it's probably going to go mostly to companies that come later that have figured out like the problems with the first one or the things that people didn't like or the feedback that was necessary to make better versions. And then that's just what they sell. They just do the same thing, but largely different.
Yeah.
And that's where people find a lot of success.
You need to study the market first, and it actually helps to have companies out there. I like the example like I just gave you is look at ChatGPT and then look at Claude. I would say Claude is just running laps around ChatGPT these days, and same with kind of Grok too. But ChatGPT was first, like they were the first company. So to really be big at doing AI, and so it doesn't really matter if you have that advantage. You'll still do okay even if you do make it, but you're probably not going to be the best, right? Like the BlackBerry was the first big cell phone, really. because it had the keys and everything. And then the iPhone came out way later. Like, and look where that's taken technology. Like, nobody's still using a BlackBerry anymore. For the most part, we've all kind of like followed whoever does the job the best. And if you're focused on that, you could really enter at any time. It's never really, really too late. Let's go to the kind of our final point. And I would say this is kind of the odds that nobody says out loud. And I want to be true with you, right? We already told you that the most successful people are around 50, 45 to 50 when they get into a successful startup. You're maybe what, 18, 20, 25, maybe 30 even. Like, you got time, as Gary Vee would say. 90% of startups fail, and 20% fail in the first year, 50 by their fifth year, and 70% by year 10. The first time founder of a company success rate is about 18% of having any success. And then unicorns is about 1%, right? To actually blow up. Anthony, would you say those odds and the fact that the success happens when we said, does that change how you think about what we're working on, like with Altura, and maybe how other people should too? Or does every founder, you think, just think they're that 10% that's going to be successful? Like,
Yeah. I think initially every founder thinks that they will be that 10%. I mean, because otherwise, why would you spend the time now putting it in? It's daunting, I suppose, to think about the fact that we statistically, we have an 82% chance of failing as first time founders. I like to think of it as like a holistic kind of view of my life. Maybe we're a first time founder at, our mid 20s, and then maybe even if Altura doesn't work out to be the thing that we have envisioned, that's now setting us up for the second time founder being a even higher chance of winning. Then we only have like a 70% chance of failing. If you continue to put in the time and effort into something you believe in and something that you really think would be of aid to the people of this world as a product to sell or a service, I think that it would hurt you more to wait to develop that than it would to start now and to experience the failure that might make you more successful in the future, because it gives you opportunities to learn. So when you ask like how I feel about, that stat, given what we're trying to do with Altura, I think the mindset, the entrepreneurial mindset has to be, if you're going to commit yourself to starting something from scratch and own it and develop it and grow, that your mindset kind of has to be that failure or no failure, it's not about the service or product, it's about the success in the end. And you might learn something from a failed product or service, and you might be one of that 10% that ends up being successful. And either way, if you want to succeed at your end goal, which every entrepreneur's end goal is their version of success, it's not necessarily the business itself. Rarely is it that. If that's really your goal in life, then you're going to have to put in the work from now until then anyways. So
don't be afraid to do what we've done as you've watched this podcast, or if you're new, I'll just tell you how many times you've heard us pivot on what Nova and Altura have looked like, but we never really pivoted on the vision, right, of what they were supposed to solve and what they were supposed to help people with. I think of a kid, right, with those little shapes, holes, and the different pegs you got to put in them. Like, the square might not like throw directly in the hole. You kind of got to wiggle it around a bit. But if you have the square on the square hole, you might have to twist and turn it a little bit. But eventually, it's going to go through that hole, and you're going to find success. So you might not hit it like 10 out of 10 coming out the gate. You do got to play around with your ideas. And I would say more likely than you actually giving up, there's probably a better chance that you just have to slightly pivot what you're doing. But also, you're not 50, right? For the most part. If you are watching this, like, you still have time. But you have a while to get this figured out. And college isn't going to teach you this. So you got to start doing it on your own and getting the reps in. Age doesn't work the way you think. Co-founders don't work the way you think. Money, isn't necessarily only what kills you. Being first isn't the edge in the competition. The move is to know the real numbers and just fucking build anyway. And if you guys want to like watch people build in real time, as Anthony said, amazing plug for that. It's free. Check out the links below, and I want you to come see what we're making.
I think part of the statistics that says the older you are, the more likely you are to succeed at your entrepreneurial endeavor rather, is why, I mean, yeah, the experience necessary. The experience to be successful comes from that extra time they've had, but also I think we're just a little bit naive, all of us, as we start, right? In thinking that we're going to develop something our first try or in the first month. I mean, we've said things ourselves in like planning out in our visions, like, oh yeah, by like Q3 of next year, we're going to have this down, which might have been like super ambitious, we should say, maybe a lofty goal for someone who's starting their first venture at mid 20s. But it's just like that initial excitement, that's a great thing. Don't let it die out. But be real with yourself. No matter how difficult it might be, you gotta be real with yourself and saying, "I'm gonna stay committed to this, and I'd rather that and fail a few times and then learn than I would be discouraged from these statistics from ever trying." And I think that's the way that we for sure think about it, and that we encourage all of our viewers to think about it as well.
Yeah. Most of you guys that are planning want your business to like scale linearly. And then your expectations start like going up with the scale too. And so if my expectation is, we're going to have X amount of users by quarter 3 of next year, like Anthony said, and you're below that, like that's usually a sign you take to like give up because the business doesn't work, right? But most of the time, as we know, it's a very flat curve until the end of the day, but then that end point ends up beating where you were going to be from the first place. So you can't just look at the numbers all the time, which is really hard for people like me who like to plan it out. But just look at it in the span of, are you solving a problem that people will continue to have? And are you giving a better experience like Apple did for compared to what's out there? If you hit those, I think it's very hard for you to fail with enough time. And you got to be patient too, right? If you want it to work today, it's probably not. You should probably just go DoorDash or something and invest, right? Because then you get money that same day. But if you want to make it big and you want to be that 1% or 10%, we're here to help you for free. And I don't know why you wouldn't take that if that's just increasing the chances of that exponential growth curve taking off even faster. I would love to have you in, and I appreciate you guys for listening today. This has been the Ascended Podcast. We're rooting for you in every single way possible. All you got to do is come show us that you're willing to join us on the same journey that we're running ourselves. So without further ado, have a great night, everybody, and we'll see you back next week for another one.
I'll take care.